The yellow school bus pulled up to the fancy iron gates of Brookfield Prep Academy with a loud screech of brakes. Anthony Davis pressed his face against the window, watching as perfectly manicured lawns stretched out in front of a building that looked more like a mansion than a school. His stomach twisted into knots as he gripped the straps of his worn-out backpack. "This is it, kid," the bus driver called back. "End of the line." Anthony stood up slowly, his sneakers squeaking against the rubber floor. He was the only student getting off at this stop. The other kids on the bus lived in different neighborhoods and went to different schools. Schools that probably didn't have marble columns and fountains in their front yards. As he stepped off the bus, the doors closed behind him with a hiss. The sound felt final, like there was no going back now. Anthony looked up at the building in front of him. 3 stories of red brick and white trim, with windows so clean they sparkled in the morning sun. Everything about this place screamed money. He walked through the main entrance, his footsteps echoing in the huge hallway. The floors were polished so well he could see his reflection. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and oil paintings of old white men in suits lined the walls. Anthony had never seen anything like it. "You must be our new student," said a voice behind him. Anthony turned around to see a woman in a navy blue suit walking toward him. Her hair was pulled back tight and she wore glasses that made her look stern. "Yes, ma'am. Anthony Davis. I'm Mrs. Peterson, the vice principal. Welcome to Brookfield Prep." She looked him up and down, taking in his faded jeans and old sneakers. "Let's get you registered and show you around." They walked through hallways filled with students who all seemed to have stepped out of a magazine. The boys wore khakis and polo shirts. The girls had designer bags and perfect hair. Everyone looked like they belonged here. Everyone except Anthony. Mrs. Peterson led him to the main office, where a secretary handed him a schedule and a map of the school. "Your first class is English with Mr. Thompson, room 204, second floor." "Thank you," Anthony said, studying the map. The school was huge. He had no idea how he was going to find his way around. "One more thing," Mrs. Peterson said. "We have high standards here at Brookfield Prep. I trust you'll do your best to meet them." The way she said it made Anthony feel like she didn't think he could. He nodded anyway and headed toward the stairs. Finding room 204 took longer than expected. Anthony walked down 3 different hallways before he finally found it. By the time he knocked on the door, class had already started. "Come in," called a voice from inside. Anthony opened the door and stepped into the classroom. 20 pairs of eyes turned to stare at him. The teacher, a tall man with graying hair, looked up from his book. "You must be our new student, Anthony, right?" "Yes, sir. Welcome. Please take a seat anywhere you'd like." Anthony looked around the room. Most of the seats were taken, but there were a few empty ones scattered around. He chose one in the back corner, hoping to blend in and not draw any more attention to himself. As he sat down, he heard whispers from the students around him. "Where do you think he's from?" "Probably downtown. His clothes look like they came from a thrift store." Anthony pretended not to hear them and opened his notebook. The teacher was talking about some book called The Great Gatsby, but Anthony couldn't focus. He kept thinking about how different this place was from his old school. At Lincoln Middle School, the hallways were crowded and noisy. The lockers were dented and covered in graffiti. The cafeteria served pizza that tasted like cardboard and milk that was always warm, but it was home. He knew everyone and everyone knew him. Here everything was perfect and quiet and clean. The students spoke in hushed tones and never seemed to get their uniforms wrinkled. Anthony felt like an outsider looking in through a window. When English class ended, Anthony checked his schedule. Next up was math with Mrs. Rodriguez. He asked a girl with blonde hair for directions. "Room 118, she said without looking up from her phone. "It's downstairs, thank you." She glanced at him then, taking in his appearance. "Are you on scholarship?" The question caught him off guard. "Excuse me?" "Financial aid, scholarship, that's how most of the—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Diverse students get in here." Anthony felt his face grow hot. "Yeah, partial scholarship." She nodded like that explained everything. "That's nice. Good for you." There was something in her tone that made it clear she didn't really think it was good for him at all. Math class went better. Mrs. Rodriguez seemed nice enough, and the material wasn't too hard. Anthony had always been good with numbers, but he still felt the stares from his classmates. Some were curious. Others seemed annoyed that he was there. During lunch, Anthony sat alone at a table in the corner of the cafeteria. The food was actually good, fresh salad, real chicken, and bread that was still warm. But he barely tasted it. He was too busy watching the other students. They moved in groups, laughing and talking about things he didn't understand. Weekend trips to ski resorts, summer houses in the Hamptons, cars they were getting for their 16th birthdays. Is anyone sitting here? Anthony looked up to see a boy with dark hair and kind eyes standing next to his table. No, go ahead, Anthony said. The boy sat down and opened his lunch bag. I'm Carlos. You're the new kid, right? Anthony, cool. Where are you from? Riverside. About 20 minutes from here. Carlos nodded. I know that area. My grandmother lives there. He took a bite of his sandwich. This place can be a little overwhelming at first. A little, Anthony agreed. Don't let them get to you, Carlos said quietly. Some of these kids have never been outside their bubble. They don't know how to act around people who are different. Anthony appreciated the kindness, but he wondered if Carlos really understood what it was like. Carlos fit in here. He had the right clothes and the right way of talking. Anthony stuck out like a sore thumb. The rest of the day dragged on. History class, science, and then Spanish. By the time the final bell rang, Anthony was exhausted. Not from the schoolwork, but from the constant feeling of being watched and judged. As he walked toward the bus stop, Anthony's mother's words echoed in his head. She had worked double shifts at the hospital for months to help pay for this school. She believed it would give him opportunities he could never get anywhere else. This is your chance, baby, she had said. Don't waste it. Anthony pulled out his phone and texted her. First day done. See you tonight, she texted back immediately. How was it? Make any friends? Anthony looked back at the school building, then at the bus approaching in the distance. It was fine, he typed. Still adjusting. He didn't tell her about the stares or the whispers or the way he felt like he didn't belong. She had sacrificed too much for him to complain now. The bus doors opened and Anthony climbed aboard. Tomorrow would be another day at Brookfield Prep. He just had to figure out how to survive it. 3 weeks had passed since Anthony's first day at Brookfield Prep, and he was still trying to find his place. Some days were better than others. Carlos had introduced him to a few other students who were friendly enough, but Anthony could tell he was still seen as the scholarship kid from the wrong side of town. On Friday morning, instead of going to first period, all students were directed to the main auditorium for the monthly assembly. Anthony had never been inside the auditorium before. When he walked through the heavy wooden doors, his jaw nearly dropped. The space was enormous, with red velvet seats arranged in perfect rows that stretched from the stage all the way to the back wall. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over everything. The stage itself was huge, with dark red curtains and a grand piano sitting right in the center. Anthony found a seat toward the back, hoping to blend in with the crowd. Students filed in, chattering excitedly about weekend plans and upcoming tests. The noise level in the room was incredible, hundreds of voices all talking at once. Good morning, Brookfield Prep students, boomed a voice from the stage. The chattering died down as Principal Harrison stepped up to the microphone. He was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He wore an expensive-looking suit and a gold watch that caught the light as he gestured. I hope everyone is having a wonderful Friday, he continued. We have several announcements this morning, but first I want to talk about our upcoming annual talent show fundraiser. A few students in the front rows clapped politely. Anthony had heard about the talent show from Carlos. Apparently, it was a big deal at Brookfield Prep. Students performed everything from classical music to magic tricks, and parents paid good money to attend. The funds raised went toward new equipment and facility improvements. This year, we're hoping to raise even more money than last year, Principal Harrison said. Which means we need more participants. The talent show is in 4 weeks, and we still have slots available. He paused, scanning the audience. Now I know many of you are modest about your abilities. But this is Brookfield Prep. I'm sure we have incredible talent sitting right here in this auditorium. Anthony shifted in his seat. Something about the principal's tone made him uncomfortable, though he couldn't put his finger on what it was. In fact, Principal Harrison continued, let me ask for volunteers right now. Who would like to perform in this year's talent show? A few hands went up, scattered throughout the audience. Anthony recognized some of the students. They were the ones who always seemed confident about everything. The ones who raised their hands first in class and never seemed nervous about anything. Wonderful. That's a good start, the principal said. But I know we can do better. There's so much untapped talent in this room. His eyes began to move across the audience, row by row. Anthony felt a chill run down his spine as those eyes got closer to his section. You know, Principal Harrison said, his voice taking on a different tone. We have students here from all different backgrounds, different neighborhoods, different experiences. I'm sure they could bring some interesting perspectives to our talent show. Anthony's stomach dropped. He had a bad feeling about where this was going. In fact, let me ask our newest student to help us out. Principal Harrison's eyes locked onto Anthony's. Anthony Davis, would you please stand up? The auditorium fell silent. Anthony felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. Hundreds of heads turned to look at him. He could feel his face burning as he slowly got to his feet. There he is, Principal Harrison said with that fake smile. Anthony joined us just a few weeks ago. I'm sure he'd love to share some of his talents with us. Anthony's mouth was dry. He wanted to sit back down, to disappear into his seat and pretend this wasn't happening. But everyone was staring at him now. Even the teachers along the sides of the auditorium had turned to look. Come on up here, Anthony, the principal called out. Don't be shy. Anthony's legs felt like jelly as he made his way to the aisle. The walk down to the stage felt like it took forever. Students whispered to each other as he passed. He caught snippets of conversations. What's he going to do? This should be interesting. I bet he can't do anything. By the time Anthony reached the stage, his hands were shaking. Principal Harrison placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that might have looked friendly to the audience but felt condescending to Anthony. Now then, the principal said into the microphone. I'm sure Anthony has some musical talents he'd like to share with us. After all, music is such a universal language, isn't it? The way he said universal made Anthony's skin crawl. It was like the principal was making some kind of joke that Anthony didn't understand. Tell me, Anthony, Principal Harrison continued. Do you play any instruments? Anthony's throat felt tight. He glanced out at the sea of faces staring at him. Some looked curious. Others looked like they were waiting for a show and not the good kind. I play a little piano, Anthony managed to say. Perfect. Principal Harrison clapped his hands together. We have a beautiful grand piano right here on stage. Why don't you play something for us? Anthony looked at the piano. It was gorgeous. A black Steinway that probably cost more than his family's car. The kind of instrument he'd dreamed of playing but never thought he'd get the chance to touch. Oh, I don't know, Anthony said quietly. I'm not really prepared or anything. Nonsense, the principal said loudly. I'm sure you can play something. Anything at all. We're not looking for perfection here, just entertainment. The word entertainment hit Anthony like a slap. He suddenly understood what was happening. This wasn't about giving him an opportunity. This was about putting him on display, making him perform like some kind of circus act for the amusement of the wealthy students and their families. Principal Harrison gestured toward the piano bench. Go ahead, Anthony. Show us what you can do. Anthony's mind raced. He could refuse, but that would probably make things worse. He could try to play something simple and get it over with, or... He looked out at the audience again. Students had their phones out now, ready to record whatever happened next. Some were already smiling, like they were expecting him to embarrass himself. In the third row, Anthony spotted Carlos, who looked worried. A few seats over, he saw the blonde girl from his first day, the one who had asked about his scholarship. She had that same look on her face, like she was watching something that confirmed everything she already believed. We're waiting, Principal Harrison said with that fake patient smile. Anthony's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. His mother's words echoed in his mind. This is your chance, baby. Don't waste it. Maybe this wasn't the chance she had been talking about, but it was a chance nonetheless. Anthony walked slowly toward the piano bench. The auditorium was so quiet he could hear his footsteps echoing. He sat down and placed his hands on the keys. They were cool and smooth under his fingers. He closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, he was ready. Anthony sat at the piano bench, his fingers resting on the smooth ivory keys. The silence in the auditorium was deafening. He could feel hundreds of eyes boring into him, waiting for him to mess up, waiting for the show they thought they were about to see. Behind him, Principal Harrison stood with his arms crossed, that smug smile still plastered on his face. Anthony could practically hear the man's thoughts. Let's see what this kid from downtown can really do. In the audience, phones were already recording. Students leaned forward in their seats, some with cruel grins, others looking uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. A few teachers shifted nervously, probably wondering if they should intervene. Anthony's mind drifted back to his old apartment, where an old upright piano sat crammed into the corner of their tiny living room. His grandmother had bought it at a garage sale when he was 4 years old. Half the keys stuck and it was always slightly out of tune, but it was his. "Play for me, baby," his grandmother used to say. Music don't care where you come from or what you look like. Music just cares if you got soul. She had been gone for 3 years now, but her words still echoed in his head every time he sat down to play. Anthony placed his hands in position and closed his eyes. For a moment he let himself forget where he was. He forgot about the rich kids with their designer clothes and expensive cars. He forgot about Principal Harrison and his fake smile. He forgot about feeling like he didn't belong. Then he began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 filled the auditorium, soft and gentle at first. Anthony's fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his age. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, each note crystal clear and perfectly placed. In the audience, the snickering stopped immediately. Phones that had been raised to record his failure were slowly lowered, as students realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. The piece started simple, almost innocent, but Anthony knew what was coming. As the music progressed, it would become more complex, more demanding, more emotional. It was one of the hardest pieces in classical piano repertoire, something that professional concert pianists spent years perfecting. But Anthony had been playing it since he was 10. His fingers danced across the keys as the music began to build. The gentle melody transformed into something more urgent, more passionate. His left hand provided a steady rhythm while his right hand soared through intricate passages that required incredible skill and precision. Principal Harrison's smile began to fade. He took a step closer to the piano, his eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't what he had expected at all. In the third row, Carlos sat with his mouth hanging open. He had known Anthony was smart, but he had no idea about this. The music filled every corner of the massive auditorium, rich and powerful and absolutely perfect. The blonde girl who had asked about Anthony's scholarship was no longer smiling. She stared at the stage with a look of complete shock, her phone forgotten in her lap. As the piece reached its most technically demanding section, Anthony's hands moved so fast they were almost a blur. Complex scales and arpeggios flowed from his fingers like water. The music swelled and soared, telling a story without words, a story of struggle and triumph, of pain and joy, of someone who had something important to say and the skill to say it beautifully. Anthony was completely lost in the music now. His eyes were closed, his head swaying slightly with the rhythm. This was where he belonged, where he felt most like himself, not in fancy classrooms or expensive hallways, but here, with music flowing through him and out into the world. The audience was completely silent except for the piano. Even the teachers had stopped moving. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, afraid to break the spell. As the piece neared its climax, Anthony's playing became even more intense. His fingers attacked the keys with controlled fury, the music building to an emotional peak that seemed to shake the very walls of the auditorium. Then suddenly it softened again, becoming gentle and peaceful, like sunlight after a storm. When Anthony played the final notes, the silence that followed seemed to last forever. He kept his hands on the keys for a moment, his eyes still closed, letting the last echoes fade away. Then he opened his eyes and looked out at the audience. Every single person in the auditorium was staring at him with their mouths open. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then someone in the back started clapping. The applause spread like wildfire through the auditorium. Within seconds, the entire crowd was on their feet, clapping and cheering louder than Anthony had ever heard. The sound was overwhelming, washing over him like a wave. But Anthony wasn't done yet. As the applause continued, he turned back to the piano. Without saying a word, he began to play again. This time, it wasn't classical music. It was jazz. A smooth, soulful improvisation that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. His fingers found a rhythm that was completely different from the Chopin piece. This was looser, more relaxed, but just as skillful. He played with the melody, twisted it, changed it, made it his own. It was the kind of music his grandmother used to love, the kind that told stories about real life and real people. The audience, still standing, swayed along with the music. Even Principal Harrison seemed mesmerized, his fake smile replaced by genuine amazement. Anthony transitioned seamlessly from jazz into something else entirely, a piece he had written himself during long nights in his bedroom when he couldn't sleep. It was modern and fresh, mixing classical techniques with contemporary melodies. It was the sound of his neighborhood, of his life, of everything he had experienced growing up. The music told the story of a kid who didn't fit in, who felt out of place everywhere he went. But it also told the story of someone who had found his voice, who had something beautiful to share with the world, whether the world was ready for it or not. As he played, Anthony felt something shift in the room. The energy was different now. The students weren't looking at him like he was an outsider anymore. They were looking at him with respect, with admiration, with something that might even be called awe. When he finally finished, the applause was even louder than before. Students were cheering, whistling, shouting his name. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Anthony stood up from the piano bench and looked out at the crowd. Principal Harrison approached him, but the smug confidence was gone. The man looked shaken, like he didn't know what to say. That was... The principal stammered into the microphone. That was absolutely incredible. Anthony just nodded. He could see Carlos jumping up and down in his seat, grinning from ear to ear. Even some of the students who had whispered cruel things about him on his first day were clapping enthusiastically. But the person Anthony was thinking about wasn't in the audience at all. He was thinking about his grandmother, and how proud she would have been to see him play on that beautiful piano in front of all those people. "Music don't care where you come from," he whispered to himself as the applause continued to thunder around him. He had just proven that beyond any doubt the applause seemed to go on forever. Anthony stood on the stage, still trying to process what had just happened. Students who had barely looked at him for 3 weeks were now on their feet, cheering louder than he'd ever heard at any school event. Principal Harrison stepped up to the microphone, his face pale and his usual confidence completely shaken. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I think we can all agree that was exceptional." The word came out like he was struggling to find the right thing to say. Anthony could see the wheels turning in the principal's head as he tried to figure out how to handle what had just happened. "Anthony," Principal Harrison said, turning to face him, "where on earth did you learn to play like that?" The question hung in the air. The entire auditorium had gone quiet again, waiting for the answer. Anthony looked out at the sea of faces, all focused on him with a completely different energy than before. "I've been playing since I was 4, Anthony said into the microphone. His voice echoed through the speakers, reaching every corner of the auditorium. "My grandmother taught me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Anthony could see students turning to each other, whispering in amazement. "She bought me an old piano at a garage sale," Anthony continued. "It was falling apart, but she said music was the most important thing I could learn. She used to be a piano teacher back in the day." Mrs. Chen, the music teacher, stood up from her seat in the faculty section. "Anthony, that was Chopin's Ballade No. 1. That's a piece that takes most students years to master. How long have you been working on it?" Anthony felt his face grow warm. He wasn't used to being the center of attention like this, especially not positive attention. "About 4 years, he said. "My grandmother had the sheet music. She always said I should learn the hard pieces because they teach you the most." The music teacher's eyes widened. 4 years? You've been playing pieces at that level since you were 10? "My grandmother was really good," Anthony said simply. "She pushed me to practice every day, even when I didn't want to." Principal Harrison was starting to look more and more uncomfortable. Anthony could tell the man was realizing that his little joke had backfired spectacularly. "Well," the principal said, clearing his throat, "this is certainly unexpected. Perhaps we should—" But before he could finish, Mrs. Chen was walking down the aisle toward the stage. "Anthony," she called out, "have you ever competed? Entered any piano competitions?" Anthony shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He really didn't want to make a big deal out of this, but the teacher was looking at him expectantly, and so was everyone else. "A few," he said quietly. What kind of competitions? Mrs. Chen pressed as she reached the stage. Anthony took a deep breath. State competitions, mostly. I won the junior division 3 years in a row. Last year I placed second in the regional championship. A gasp went through the audience. Even some of the teachers looked shocked. Carlos stood up in his seat. Anthony, why didn't you ever tell me about this? Anthony shrugged.
It never came up.
And I figured nobody here would really care about that stuff. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Anthony had just revealed something that put everything in perspective. This wasn't some kid from the wrong side of town who got lucky. This was a serious musician who had been competing at high levels for years. Principal Harrison stepped forward again, but this time his whole demeanor was different. The smugness was completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. Anthony, he said carefully, I want you to know that when I asked you to play, I had no idea about your background. I was simply trying to encourage student participation in our talent show. Anthony looked at him for a long moment. They both knew that wasn't true, but calling out the principal in front of the entire school probably wasn't the smartest move. Sure, Anthony said simply. Mrs. Chen climbed up onto the stage. Anthony, I need to ask you something. Are you currently taking lessons? Do you have a piano teacher? Not anymore, Anthony said. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago. We can't really afford private lessons. And the piano at home isn't in great shape anymore. The music teacher looked like someone had just told her that a priceless painting was sitting in a storage unit, somewhere. You haven't had formal instruction in 3 years, and you're still playing at this level? I practice every day, Anthony said, and I watch a lot of videos online. There are some good teachers on YouTube. Mrs. Chen turned to Principal Harrison. We need to talk. Immediately after this assembly. The principal nodded, but he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. A student in the front row raised her hand. Anthony recognized her as Jessica, one of the top students in his English class. Anthony, she said when Mrs. Chen nodded to her. That last piece you played, the modern one. Did you write that yourself? Anthony nodded. Yeah, I write music sometimes. When I can't sleep or when I'm thinking about stuff. You compose your own music? Mrs. Chen's voice went up an octave. How many pieces have you written? I don't know. Maybe 20 or 30? I don't really keep count. The teacher put her hand to her forehead like she was getting a headache. This is incredible, she muttered. Anthony, do you realize what kind of talent you have? Do you understand how rare this is? Anthony didn't really know how to answer that. To him, playing piano was just something he did. It was like breathing or walking. He'd never thought of it as particularly special. I guess I just like music, he said. From somewhere in the middle of the auditorium, a voice called out, Can you play something else? Other students started agreeing. Yeah, play more. That was amazing. Do you know any popular songs? Anthony looked at Mrs. Chen, who nodded enthusiastically. If you'd like to. This is your moment. Anthony sat back down at the piano. Okay, but just one more. Then I think we should probably get back to regular assembly stuff. He thought for a moment about what to play. Then he smiled and placed his hands on the keys. This one's for my grandmother, he said into the microphone. He began to play Clair de Lune by Debussy, a piece his grandmother had loved. It was gentler than the Chopin, more peaceful but just as beautiful. As the familiar melody filled the auditorium, Anthony could almost hear his grandmother's voice humming along. When he finished, the applause was softer, but somehow more meaningful. Students weren't just clapping because they were amazed anymore. They were clapping because they were moved. Anthony stood up from the piano and looked out at the audience one more time. Everything had changed in the span of about 15 minutes. He could see it in their faces, in the way they were looking at him. But the biggest change was in Principal Harrison, who was standing behind him looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Anthony had a feeling this was just the beginning. The next Monday morning felt completely different for Anthony. As he walked through the halls of Brookfield Prep, students who had never spoken to him before were coming up to say hello. Some wanted to talk about music. Others just wanted to tell him how amazing his performance had been. Anthony called out Jessica from his English class. She hurried to catch up with him as he walked toward his locker. I've been thinking about what you said on Friday, about writing your own music. Do you think you could help me write something? I play violin, but I'm terrible at composing. Anthony stopped at his locker, still getting used to this new attention. Yeah, sure. I could try to help. Really? That would be incredible. Jessica's face lit up. Maybe we could perform something together at the talent show. Before Anthony could answer, Carlos appeared at his side with a huge grin on his face. Dude, you're famous, Carlos said. Did you see the school's social media? The video of you playing has over 10,000 views already. Anthony's stomach dropped. Video? What video? Someone recorded your performance and posted it. It's everywhere. My mom saw it on Facebook this morning. Anthony pulled out his phone and sure enough, there it was. A video titled, Student's Amazing Piano Performance Shocks Entire School. The comments were mostly positive, with people praising his talent and asking who he was. This is crazy, Anthony muttered. Crazy good, Carlos said. You deserve all this attention. I can't believe you never told me you were basically a piano genius. As they walked to first period, Anthony noticed something else different. Teachers were looking at him with new respect. Even Mrs. Patterson, who had always seemed skeptical about his academic abilities, smiled and nodded when she saw him. But the biggest change came during lunch. Instead of sitting alone or just with Carlos, Anthony found himself surrounded by students who wanted to talk. Some asked about his music. Others just seemed curious about who he really was. Is it true you've never had formal lessons? Asked a girl named Riley from his science class. Not since my grandmother died, Anthony said. She taught me everything I know. That's incredible, said another student. My parents pay like $200 a week for piano lessons, and I can barely play Mary Had a Little Lamb. Anthony laughed. It's not about money. It's about practice and having someone who believes in you. As the conversation continued, Anthony felt something he hadn't experienced since starting at Brookfield Prep. He felt like he belonged. The changes weren't just social, though. On Tuesday afternoon, Anthony was called to the main office. He expected to see Principal Harrison, but instead Mrs. Chen was waiting for him, along with a woman he didn't recognize. Anthony, Mrs. Chen said, I'd like you to meet Dr. Rebecca Morgan. She's the director of the Metropolitan Youth Orchestra. The woman stepped forward and shook Anthony's hand. I saw the video of your performance, she said. I had to come see if it was real. That kind of talent is extraordinary. Anthony wasn't sure what to say. Thank you. Dr. Morgan smiled. Anthony, I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our summer intensive program. It's usually reserved for students who have been studying at conservatory level for years, but your natural ability is undeniable. Anthony's eyes widened. A scholarship? Full tuition plus access to practice rooms and some of the best instructors in the state. Dr. Morgan continued. If you're interested, of course. Mrs. Chen leaned forward. Anthony, this is a huge opportunity. The Metropolitan Youth Orchestra program has launched the careers of professional musicians. Anthony thought about his old piano at home, with its sticky keys and out-of-tune strings. Then he thought about his mother, working double shifts just to help pay for his school. I'd love to, he said, but I should probably talk to my mom first. Of course, Dr. Morgan said. Here's my card. Have her call me when you're ready. As Anthony left the office, his head was spinning. A week ago, he was just the scholarship kid that nobody noticed. Now he was being offered opportunities he'd only dreamed about. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. On Wednesday, Principal Harrison called another assembly. Anthony's stomach tightened as he walked into the auditorium. He hoped this wasn't going to be another awkward situation. The principal stepped up to the microphone, but he looked very different than he had the week before. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by something that looked almost humble. Students, he began, I want to address what happened at our assembly last Friday. Many of you witnessed something truly remarkable when Anthony Davis performed for us. Anthony shifted in his seat. He really didn't want to be the center of attention again. But I also want to address my own behavior, Principal Harrison continued. I made assumptions about Anthony based on his background, and I put him in an uncomfortable position. That was wrong of me, and I want to publicly apologize. A murmur went through the auditorium. Students looked at each other in surprise. Principals didn't usually apologize for anything. Anthony, Principal Harrison said, looking directly at him. Would you please join me on stage? Anthony's heart started racing again, but this time felt different. As he walked down the aisle, students clapped encouragingly instead of watching with cruel anticipation. When he reached the stage, Principal Harrison handed him an envelope. Anthony, the school board met last night to discuss your situation. We're pleased to offer you a full academic scholarship for the remainder of your time here at Brookfield Prep. This includes all tuition, books, and activities. Anthony stared at the envelope in his hands. Full scholarship? You've proven that you belong here, the principal said. Your talent, your character, and your determination are exactly what Brookfield Prep should represent. We were wrong to make you feel otherwise. The applause that followed was warm and genuine. Anthony looked out at the audience and saw faces that had completely transformed over the past week. These weren't the same students who had whispered about his clothes and his background. They were classmates who respected him for who he was. But the best part came after the assembly, when Anthony called his mother to tell her the news. A full scholarship, she said, and he could hear the tears in her voice. Baby, I'm so proud of you. It's not just about the scholarship, Mom, Anthony said. Everything's different now. I feel like I actually belong here. You always belong there, his mother said. You just had to show them who you really are. That afternoon, Anthony sat at the grand piano in the music room, practicing for the upcoming talent show. Mrs. Chen had convinced him to perform again, and this time he was looking forward to it. As his fingers moved across the keys, Anthony thought about his grandmother. She had always told him that music was a universal language, something that could break down any barrier. She had been right. The piano at school was beautiful, perfectly tuned and maintained. But as Anthony played, he found himself missing that old upright piano in his apartment, with all its flaws and imperfections. That piano had taught him that it wasn't about having the best instrument or the most expensive lessons. It was about having heart, and that was something nobody could ever take away from him.